Paratmanamekam jagadbijamadyam niriham nirakaram omkaravidyam yato jayate palyate yena vishvam tamisham bhaje liyate yatra vishvam. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Dear devotees, today in this Prabuddha Bharata series of talks, we are very delighted and extremely happy, and we consider ourselves to be very fortunate that we have with us a very distinguished speaker, revered Swami Atmapriyananda Ji Maharaj, who does not need any separate introduction because Maharaj is well known among the devotees of the Ramakrishna order as one of the very erudite monks of this great Sangha. And today he is going to deliberate upon the subject of understanding Bhavamukha, Sri Ramakrishna's unique state of consciousness. This was an article written by revered Maharaj in the Prabuddha Bharata in the year 2011. So the subject of Sri Ramakrishna's unique state of consciousness, Bhavamukha, is a very fascinating subject, and we all know that. And Maharaj's article also is extremely illuminating and practical. I would just wish to read one sentence from Maharaj's this article, where he states very beautifully, the avatara remaining in Bhavamukha transacts with the relative world out of motiveless compassion, a haituki karuna, with his being fully immersed all the while in the absolute Brahman. So when I read the sentence, I am just reminded of Bhagavan Sri Shankaracharya's masterly introduction to Sri Krishna's Bhagavad Gita. There, while discussing this phenomenon of avatar, Bhagavan Sri Shankara says that this Bhagavan, who is Jnana, Shakti, Bala, Virya, Tejobi, Sada Sampanna, ever endowed with Jnana, Shakti, Bala, Virya, and Teja. And then he says, he is ever Nitya, Shuddha, Buddha, Mukta Swabhava Apisan. Though this Bhagavan is ever established in the Nitya, in his true nature, he is ever free, ever pure, eternally awake. That is his absolute or transcendental dimension. In spite of being so, Sri Shankaracharya says there, with his own Maya, he appears in a human form. And then Bhagavan Bhashakara there goes ahead and says, why does he appear in this human form? He uses a very beautiful two expressions. Swat prayojana abhave api san. He says, though this avatara has got nothing to gain for himself, this avatara is a phenomenon which comes to this human plane only for the sake of, Shri Shankaracharya says, Lokanugraham Kurvan. Only for the sake of Lokanugrahan Kurvan. Only for the sake of showering this Ishvara's Anugraha out of infinite compassion. Bhuta Anujigrakshaya. In order to shower this Ishvara's Anugraha on the so-called the mortals who are immersed in this ocean of Maya. So this phenomenon of avatar, in whom we find this wonderful capability in which the avatara's one feet is in the Nitya and the other feet is in the Leela. And this effortless commuting between the Nitya and the Leela, the effortless commuting between the transcendent and the immanent, between the Saguna and the Nirguna. So this is a wonderful state of consciousness, which is the unique characteristic of all the avatars. Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, Bhagavan Sri Shankaracharya, Bhagavan Buddha, Bhagavan Sri Krishna, Bhagavan Sri Rama. In every avatar's life, we find this wonderful phenomenon of, of their being in both these states of transcendence as well as immanence. And that is the real ideal for the so-called ordinary jivas to simulate. Now, this is the main subject which Revered Maharaj is going to deliberate upon. So I am sure that all the listeners and the audience will be extremely eager to know more about this subject. And we are sure that we are going to be illuminated by Maharaj's wonderful explanation. So with this brief introduction, I leave the floor to Swami Chidekananda and request him to carry the program forward.
Om Namaste. My pranams to the revered Maharajas present. And Maharaj gave already a complete introduction. I just want to add just a couple of things. So this Prabuddha Bharata Conversations with Authors, this is a new program that we're starting. And just one thing I just want to add, that I'm really delighted with the types of talks that we're having. And I think that the distinguishing factor of these conversations with authors is that they both have spiritual depth as well as authenticity. And let me explain, because this is the second senior monk that we have that will be first was Swami Nityastananji Maharaj. So just take this Bhavamukha, for example. So Maharaj is speaking on it, but if you notice that the one thing he talks about what Bhavamukha is. Then he also talks about its philosophical significance. But the most important thing I felt was he adds a third and original dimension. And that dimension is he talks about how to put this into practice in our daily lives. And I think that why I said authenticity is because this is just not an article that Maharaj just decided to write. He's been a monk for 55 years. And I'm very close to Maharaj, and he shared with me, this is actually his main sadhana. And this is what he did. When he talks about that energy, that Shakti he got from building up this Vivekananda University, this was the spiritual practice that he used. So I think that we're very, very fortunate that sometimes that we get scholars, and sometimes we get practitioners. But in Maharaj, we're getting both a scholar of depth as well as a sincere sadhaka. So I request Maharaj that, Maharaj, if possible, we'd like to make this a question-answer type thing. So if possible, if you can speak maybe for 20-25 minutes, and then maybe we can engage in some question-answer format like that. So,
yeah. Om yo brahmanam vidadhati purvam yo vai vedanscha prahinoti tasmai tam hadevam atmabuddhi prakasham mumukshurvai sharanamaham prapadye nishkalam nishkriyam shantam niravadyam niranjanam amritasya param setum dagdhendhanamivanalam. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma amritam gamaya Aviravirmayedhi Rudrayatte dakshinam mukham Tena mam pahi nityam Om Shanti 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 Om Shakti Samudra Samutsatarangam Darshita Prema Vijrumbhitarangam Samshaya Rakshasa Nasha Mahastram Yami Gurum Sharanam Bhava Vaidyam Advaya Tattva Samahita Chittam Projvala Bhakti Patavrita Vrittam Karma Kalevara Madbhuta Cheshtam Yami Gurum Sharanam Bhava Vaidyam Naradeva Deva Jaya Jaya Naradeva. The subject this evening is Bhavamukha, a unique state of consciousness of Sri Ramakrishna. As was just discussed by Swami Chidekananda ji, this is not unique only to Sri Ramakrishna. We believe that all the avatars and prophets of the world remained in this state in order that they can be beneficial spiritually for the human beings who are in bondage. There is an enigma in Vedanta, which is the following. How is it that a man of realization is able to teach about his realization after coming back from that state of infinite consciousness? Or does he come back at all? The Upanishad itself declares, Brahma Veda Brahma Iva Bhavati. A knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. Sri Ramakrishna puts it in his own inimitable style, Nuner Putul Samudra Mapta Galo. A salt doll wanted to know the depths of the ocean. And no sooner than it entered the ocean, than it simply melted away. Then who teaches humanity? If it is a man of realization, he can't come back and teach because he merges in Brahman, as the Upanishad says. And if he teaches to humanity without having attained the supreme knowledge, his teaching should not be taken to be authentic. Here is a catch-22 situation. And therefore, you have to per se assert that there's a mysterious phenomenon of a man of supreme knowledge coming back and remaining in the state of relative consciousness to be able to teach humanity. How is it possible? You merge in the infinite, like the salted doll, then you come back again. How does it happen? Sri Ramakrishna himself answers it in the Kasamrita, the Gospel of Ramakrishna, to say, salted doll entered the ocean and merged, and by the Guru's grace, it turned into a form which did not melt at all. And he also talks about Nitya Sakara. There are places where the ice does not melt. Sri Ramakrishna uses this example very often about bhakti and jnana being identical, knowledge and devotion. With the intense coolness of bhakti, devotion, there may be certain places in the ocean which freeze to form an ice, which has a akara form. And when the sun of knowledge arises, this ice melts away and becomes water again. So the water and the ice, with form and without form, Saguna, Nirguna, are just two states of the same substance called water. And he adds, there are places where the ice does not melt. Nitya Sakara. Those of you who have carefully read the Gospel of Ramakrishna will remember that at that point of time, the recorder of the Gospel M says in whisper to a person sitting nearby, Nitya Shakar Janishta ki thik buste parlum na. I couldn't quite understand the meaning of eternal form. This is the mystery of the Avatara. There are certain forms which the divine, supreme, they call the cosmic mind or the Hiranyagarbha, throws into the cosmic consciousness. These forms remain till the end of the Kalpa. This is the Indian lore. In order to help mankind, these are the avatars, the prophets, the saviors of mankind. The idea of Bhavamukha was not conceptualized by Sri Ramakrishna, not philosophized, even metaphysically thrown as an idea or a concept in the philosophical lore, but it is a result of his direct spiritual experience. 3 times he heard the Divine Mother Jagadamba, Bhavatarini, Kali, commanding him to be in the state of Bhavamukha. Haladhari, Ramakrishna was his cousin, told Sri Ramakrishna, see, the forms that you see are only imaginations of your own mind. How can the infinite have a form? The infinite can't be finite, nor the finite can be infinite. How can the infinite and the absolute have a form which is bound by space and time? Sri Ramakrishna felt very much perturbed. The innocent child that he was, with tears, he ran to the mother and said, "Ma, আমি কিচ্ছু জানি নে, আমাকে মুখ্য ভেবে তুই আমাকে ঠকালি। এরা তো পণ্ডিত, ও বলছে এই রূপ টুপ সব মিথ্যা, তাহলে আমি তো দিন ভুল দেখে এসছি।" With tears, he said, "Mother, just because I'm a fool, I'm innocent of all scriptural knowledge. Is it the reason why you cheated me all these days? Showing me forms which I saw palpably talking to me, revealing their real nature to me. I saw God, talk to Him, moving with Him, dancing with Him, palpably, truly. Is it all unreal?" When the tears flowed down his divine cheeks, the mother told him, "You remain in Bhavamukha. You remain in Bhavamukha. You remain in Bhavamukha. Tui Bhavamukhe thak. Tui Bhavamukhe thak. Tui Bhavamukhe thak." Again, on another occasion, when he remembered these words of Haladhari while doing the worship, his mind was terribly perturbed about the reality of these divine forms which he saw day in and day out. Then he says, the Divine Mother peeped from the ghata, the pitcher, which was before him for worship, in the form of Ratirma, Rati's mother, and then said, "Tui Bhavamukhe thak, Tui Bhavamukhe thak, Tui Bhavamukhe thak." Remain in Bhavamukha. Third time, when he attained the highest pinnacle of spiritual consciousness called the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, when all Vikalpa vanishes, all forms and names are thrown behind, when time, space, and causation are transcended, when the consciousness soars to the highest, infinite, and the absolute, Sri Ramakrishna was merged in that state for nearly 6 long months. Breathing had stopped, heartbeat had stopped, and his entire body became stiff like a corpse. At the end of which, he saw a divine voice speaking from within, Tui Bhavamukha Thak. On another occasion, in the Kuchi Badi, where he was staying in Dakshineshwar, he saw a smoke coming out from the floor, and he saw a divine face. He says, Shommamurti, a beautiful form, so pure, so divine, so enchantingly elevating in appearance, with a long white beard, grey beard. That form looked at him intently and said, Tui Bhavamukha Thak. I asked one of our very senior Swamis of the order, who was also an editor of Prabuddha Bharata, Swami Satswarupananda. He was a disciple of Holy Mother Sharada. He had his sannyasa initiation from Swami Brahmanandaji and had intimately mixed with all the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna except Swami Yogananda and Vivekananda, who passed away very early. I asked him, who is this farm? He said, Vyasa. Because Vyasa encounters all the avatars, as you know. He said, no, it is Hiranyagarbha. Hiranyagarbha is the cosmic mind. Virat Mon. This is the description given in the Sri Ramakrishna Leela Prasanga. The great master is translated, and the new translation by Swami Chidekananda is Divine Play. Hiranyagarbha is the cosmic mind. It is in Vedanta called Samashti Buddhyupahita Chaitanya. It is the subtle form of Brahman. It is the collection of all the buddhi, the Vijnanamaya, the cosmic samashti, and that Chaitanya which has this as the upadhi is called the Hiranyagarbha. And the state of Bhavamukha is the state of Hiranyagarbha, the Ishvara. This is a very interesting phenomenon. You have the 3 states of consciousness known: waking, dream, and deep sleep. Jagrata, Swapna, Sushupti. And the 4th state is called the Turiya, or the transcendental. This is mapped on in the Mandika Upanishad into A, U, Ma. Om, the 3 letters of Om. And beyond that is Trimat, Amatras Chaturtha, the 4th, which is beyond all matras. This can be understood in terms of the Pancha Kosha, the Pancha Atma, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya Atma. And beyond that is the Panchakosha Vilakshana Atman. If you want to map it on to the Shatchakra paradigm of Yoga and Tantra, it will be starting from Mooladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipura, Anahata, Vishuddha, Agnya, and beyond that is the Sahasrara. So, this transcendental state, which is beyond name and form, space, time, and causation, the state of Turiya in Vedanta, the state of Sahasrara in Shatchakra paradigm, the Panchakosha Vilakshana in the Vedanta paradigm according to the Taittiriya Upanishad. This is the transcendental state. And Brahman has two forms. One is the transcendental form, absolute and infinite. And this form of Brahman, Shankara calls it the Gaya Brahman, that has to be realized as your own Atman. Bhagavan Bhashyakara Shankara repeatedly mentions this. This transcendental supreme Atman is realizable as your own inner self, the Atman. Atma Brahma Aikya, the non-difference, oneness of the Atman and Brahman, according to Shankara, is the message of all Vedanta and Upanishads. This is epitomized in what are known as the four Mahavakyas. Aham Brahmasmi, I am the supreme Brahman. The I here is the Atman, which is beyond the kosha. Tat Tvamasi, that being that Brahman, Tvam is the Atman. Prajnanam Brahma, Prajnanam being the Atman, the Brahman is the infinite consciousness. I am Atma Brahma, this Atman is Brahman verily. Now, if the realization of Atma Brahma Aikya is the final state of realization, how is it possible that a man of realization can ever be a blessing to mankind and give his teachings to humanity? If he goes to the transcendental states and gets lost, as the salted all merges into the ocean, then how is it that he can come out from there and teach humanity? Or if he remains at the state of relative consciousness to teach humanity, how is it that he gets the transcendental knowledge at all? This is a great enigma which has been discussed in Vedanta. Shankara uncompromisingly emphasizing the transcendental state, the absolute, beyond space and time, as the ultimate state of realization. The Upanishads talk about this. It is neither the antah-prajna of dream, nor the bashit-prajna of the waking state, nor the prajnana ghana, mass of consciousness of the sleep state. It is neither a combination of both. It is supreme, independent. Na anta-pragyam, na bahya-pragyam, na ubhayata-pragyam, na prajnana-ghanam, na pragyam, na pragyam, adrishnam avyavaharyam agrahyam alakshanam achinthyam avyabadeshyam ekatma pratyayasaram prapanchopashamam shantam shivam advaitam chaturtham manyante sa atma sa vigyeyaha. Famous statement in the Mandika Upanishad. Note the last few phrases. Shantam Shivam Advaitam. This may be Advaita Atma Brahma Aikya Pratipadya, which talks about the oneness of the Atman and Brahman, or a Shivam Shantam. It is tranquil, not the ordinary kind of tranquility which is the absence of noise. What Jesus the Christ called the peace that passeth understanding. The supreme peace which is beyond time and space and causation, and the most significant word, Shivam, it is auspicious. It brings blessing to humanity. Shankara also mentioned many places. The word Sarvabhuta Hiterataha is so commonly used in the Upanishads and the Gita. The ultimate state of realization of a jnani is how he remains in the state in which he shall be able to help humanity out of compassion, about ahaituki karuna, motiveless compassion. Pranayagalita chittam jiva dukkha sahishnum. About Sri Ramakrishna, the Dhyana mantra says, Pranayagalita chittam. His chitta, his mind melts in deep compassion. Jiva dukkha asahishnum. He is unable to bear the dukkha, the sorrow of mankind. He vicariously suffers the sorrows of all of mankind as Gautam Buddha did. All the sorrows of mankind, as it were, has become part of himself. About Swami Vivekananda, there's a description by Swami Atmapriyananda. We could see how Swamiji was moved by the sorrows of humanity. His heart had become, as it were, a cauldron, and with all the miseries of humanity was poured. That is the state of Shivam, auspiciousness, blessing to humanity. So he does not merge completely in the transcendental, although he does. He remains in a state of relative consciousness, although he is fully informed by the transcendental consciousness and lives there. And he lives, as it were, in a borderline between the transcendental infinite, the absolute, beyond name and form and causation, space, time. And at the same time, he remains in a state of relative consciousness, where Advaita, a transcendental consciousness, is not compromised, and the transcendental nature of the consciousness does not reject the existence of the relative consciousness, and the borderline between these two, from which he could move at ease from one position to another, remaining in both and actually in none. What exactly is the state is indescribable, inexplicable, is anirvachaniya. Now, what is the meaning of this? Is it possible that both can exist at the same time? This is a great dilemma in not only spirituality, Vedanta, religion, metaphysics, but in science. An electron, is it a particle or is it a wave? In a particular experiments, it behaves like a particle. You can clearly see that. Photoelectric effect, for example. And there are experiments in which an electron behaves like a wave. You have the diffraction phenomena, you have interference phenomena. So, what exactly is the true nature of an electron? Science says you don't ask this question because this question itself is meaningless. There is no such thing as a true nature of anything. When it manifests as this, it is this. It manifests as that, it is that. Arthur Eddington, the famous author of a book, an old book in 30s, The Nature of the Physical World, very humorously comments. An electron behaves like a particle on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays behaves like a wave. And on Sundays, it sits on the fence. So he says, rather than calling it a particle or a wave, call it a wavicle. So the Bhavamukha is something similar to that. You can't pinpoint and say this is transcendental. Is it transcendental? Oh, yes, it is. Because you get absorbed in the infinite and the absolute. Is it relative? Of course it is relative, because you can see the people here. Sri Ramakrishna, therefore, replaced the old paradigm of Advaita Vedanta the Kevala Advaita of Shankara, in which he talks about Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. The paradigm was Satya and Mithya. He replaced that by a wonderful phrase called Nitya and Leela. Brahman is Nitya and the Jagat is Leela. It is the play of the Shakti of Brahman. This is a very interesting philosophical concept which requires a deep understanding. Then is it like the Shaktadvaita philosophy, wherein the Shakti aspect of Brahman is emphasized? It smacks of Shaktadvaita, but it is not. Ramakrishna's understanding through realization, Shakti and Brahman are non-different. The whole punchline of Sri Ramakrishna's Bhavamukha is Brahma Shakti Abhed. Brahman and Shakti are identical. They are non-different. What you call Brahman is the same as Shakti. He says when a snake is curling, quiet, it is also a snake. What is moving around in a wriggling motion is also a snake. Kundalini pekhe চুপ করে শুয়ে থাকলেও সাপ, হেলে দুলে যদি আঁকা বাঁকা যদি চলে যায় তিরিক গতিতে সেটাও সাপ. It is the same Brahman which can appear as a Shakti or Brahman. Unless you accept this position, you can't live in the world swearing by the transcendental. Sri Ramakrishna realized it and remained in Bhavamukha. We worship him, we offer flowers and do stotra part. But how is it useful to us? Because you should know, as Ramakrishna says, what is important is not study of scriptures and philosophizing. Being happy in the high intellectual realm. But what is important is practicing them in our life and how we can integrate this high philosophy, understanding of Bhavamukha in our daily practice. Is it possible? We always say, oh, these are very high states of consciousness. Ordinary jivas like us can never attain it. Don't say that. This is the problem of Sambhavana. We can't do this. Then all these avatars become meaningless. If they can't be emulated, followed, imitated, then why are they here? It is possible. I have termed it in this paper as a psychological simulation of the spiritual consciousness of Bhavamukha. It's my understanding. In the modern world, the word simulation has become very famous. The old dictionary meaning of simulation is faking, feigning, false imitation. But now, after the computers came in, computer simulation is a very important concept. You want to create a spacecraft, you want to create a scientific instrument, you simulate it on ground first. Simulation gives a small miniature model of the entire spacecraft. Not that you have actually built it, but you can simulate it on ground. It is a psychological understanding, not merely imagination, but going deep into it and feeling it in your heart of hearts through meditation of Sri Ramakrishna and Bhavamukha. Those of us who have been given the Ramakrishna mantra to meditate upon the form of Ramakrishna should realize that the meditation on Ramakrishna does not mean that you imagine a farm and he is sitting there in your heart and he is beaming with compassion. That's one aspect. That is going into the heart of Ramakrishna, his own consciousness, peeping into it as it were through our depths of our consciousness and mind and getting a taste of his own realization, participating in the realization of the Bhavamukha consciousness of Sri Ramakrishna psychologically. What does that mean? That means you are in the world doing all kinds of things. Suddenly, the time comes for you to meditate, for upasana, for sadhana. Don't think that you have to give it up and then come back. When you're doing the sadhana, when the telephone rings, don't get irritated. Oh, I'm being disturbed in meditation. The ringing of the bell is also a message from the infinite. The infinite gives you an SMS and a message, Om, I'm calling you. Everything in the world gives you the message from God. Bhagavan Sri Krishna calls it the Vibhuti of God. And the first Vibhuti of God is man himself. Aham Atma Gudakeshaha Sarva Bhutashayasthita. I am the Atman residing in all beings. That is the greatest Vibhuti of God. Wherever you see the Vibhuti of God, the modern language which is commonly used these days is signature of God. God has signed everywhere. Look at the mountain, look at the Himalayas, look at the ocean, look at the tree, look at the even a small ant which is moving there. A mosquito is coming to bite you. You tell the mosquito, oh mosquito, you bring to me the message of God, but don't bite me too much. Every one of the beings living and non-living in the world brings you the message of God. If you live in this psychological Bhavamukha, you see this entire world saturated, interpenetrated, enveloped by the supreme consciousness. Isha Vasyamidam Sarvam Mitkincha Jagatyam Jagat, as the Isha Vasya Upanishad will say. You see God with open eyes and you see God with eyes closed. It is possible. If you really seriously attempted by the grace of Sri Ramakrishna and try to peep into Ramakrishna's own mind and heart and consciousness, you can participate in his own state, get a particle of his realization so that you can live in the world completely undisturbed, happy, and always in joy, because the transcendental joy is one kind of joy, and seeing the imminent Lord present everywhere is another kind of joy. This was what Ramakrishna taught Narendra. Narendra said, I will be absorbed in the infinite, in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and now and then come only to eat something. As Ramakrishna said, that's a very low state. You all only sing Jo kuch hai so tu hi hai. You see everything, everywhere the same God is present. So see the God present everywhere and see the same thing in the infinite also. Ramanujacharya, for example, denies the Nirguna and insists that the Saguna is the highest. Shankara does not deny the relative, but he says that the infinite and the absolute are the highest. Sri Ramakrishna does not compromise Advaita, accepting the equal validity of the Nitya and the Leela, the infinite and the finite, the absolute and the relative, the transcendental and the immanent, God with form and the God without form, and Saguna and Nirguna. Sri Ramakrishna stays in the state of consciousness of Bhavamukha, blessing humanity full of smile. विज्ञानपीयूषनिमग्नमूर्तिः भस्पर्शयान्यान्दयया करेण ते कामिनी काञ्चनरिक्तचित्ताः सद्यो बभूवुर्भुवि रामकृष्णः प्रेमाब्धिगम्भीरतरङ्गभङ्गैरान्दोलितो यो भगवद्विलीनः भक्तिर्विशुद्धा स्वयमाविरासीत् पुंविग्रहोः भुवि रामकृष्णः Premabdi Gambhira Taranga Bhangai Randolito. What a beautiful stotra Pramadadas Mitra sung. He has been constantly buffeted by the waves of prema, which is also jnana, and living in that state, singing and dancing, speaking and fully immersed in the absolute and spreading the joy, the ananda of the Brahman to everybody. Sat, Chit, Ananda are three aspects of Brahman, whereas the Sat and Chit have been emphasized by Shankara Ramanuja Vedanta. Sri Ramakrishna emphasizes the Ananda aspect which subsumes Sat and Chit. So I will conclude here and leave Swami Chidekananda to ask some questions.
Maharaj, thank you. We do have a couple of questions, Maharaj. First question somebody had, Maharaj, can you please elaborate? Sri Ramakrishna said, is this Bhavamukha, is it just for avatars or is it also for Ishwara Kotis?
Ishvara Koti and Avatara have very little to distinguish between. In fact, Swami Ramakrishnananda ji, one of the illustrious monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, as you know, he is the interpreter of Swami Vivekananda's message in very simple language. Unfortunately, very few of us read Ramakrishnanda's lectures. Complete works have been brought out recently by the Chennai Mutt. There he says there is a book called God and Divine Incarnations. There he says, what is the difference between Ishvara Koti and an Avatara? He says there is very little difference, except that the Ishvara Kotis do not claim to be at the same status as their master. They are chips of the same block. It is just like asking, does a small cobra have the same kind of venom as the big cobra? Big cobra is big, it may have more venom. Ishvara Koti is, so many words are used. Ishvara Koti is one word used in Vedanta. Nitya Suri is a word which is used in Vaishnava Sampradaya, eternally living with the Lord. Adhikarika Purusha is a terminology of Brahma Sutra. Avatara is a word which is used in Vedanta as well as in the Bhakti Shastra. So Satchidananda is the ultimate description approximately possible for Brahman. So Sri Ramakrishna says Satchidananda Brahman is the same as Satchidananda Krishna of the Vaishnavas, same as Satchidananda Kali of the Tantra. They are the same. And Ishvara Kotis also live in the supreme state of consciousness, moving between the Nitya and Leela so that they can teach others. Swami Brahmananda once said, you see, my mind soars into such infinite consciousness often, in which I see the same Lord present everywhere. Whom to teach? I see he is moving everywhere, wearing so many masks. The mask of a monk, the mask of a householder, the mask of a woman, the mask of a man, and the mask of a wicked person, the mask of a holy person. Who do I teach? Then I force my mind down into Leela so that I can teach you. And at the ringing of a bell, at the playing of a flute, Sri Ramakrishna's mind, Holy Mother's mind, Swami Vivekananda and Brahmananda's minds used to soar into that infinite. There are very touching reminiscences of Swami Brahmananda. I am not leaving out Sri Ramakrishna himself, which is well known. It is said when he was in Bhuvaneshwar, his mind will never come down from the Nitya. His dear disciple Swami Nirvananandaji, Surji Maharaj, was his sevak, very dear sevak. He used to constantly move with him with a chillum of tobacco in hand, so that when the Brahmananda's mind just came down, even infinitesimally down, he has to be made to grasp the handle of the chillum so that mind comes down. If you miss that moment again, his mind soars up. And there was an incident when Brahmananda was the president, and he was to sign a document, an important legal document to be sent to everybody. He is not signing it. Sudhir Maharaj, Swami Shuddhananda, was the assistant secretary. He is telling Maharaj, please sign this. I have to send it to everybody. He said, no, I'll do it today, tomorrow. Then finally he said, Maharaj, please, you have to sign it today. He took the pen and was not signing. Maharaj, please sign. Like a child, innocently he said, Sudhir, আমার নামটা মনে পড়ছে না. I am unable to remember my name that I have a farm. Nitya. Immediately the mind goes to Nitya. So they constantly move between the Nitya and Leela. They transact this journey hundreds of thousands of times in a day and force their minds into Leela so that they can teach. How many times Ramakrishna used to shed tears and weep, Ma, আমাকে সমাধিতে এখন বেহুশ করিস না, আমি ভক্তদের সঙ্গে আলাপ করতে চাই, আমি তোমার নামগুণ কীর্তন করতে চাই. Mother, don't put me into the infinite consciousness, make me unconscious. I want to live and teach these devotees, live with them and teach them. He says that the mind has to live in the Leela state, which sometimes becomes impossible for him.
Maharaj, just to follow up on that, so when an Ishwara Koti or an avatar shows compassion, at that time, are they not in Bhavamukha then? Do they come down to the state of Leela at that time?
See, the difficulty is when coming down and going up is a concept which is purely spatial and temporal. This is one problem with the human mind of the Jiva Kotis like us. We think when they come down and talk to us, they are not in that state. And when they go up, when they can't speak to us, when they are samadhi, there's a very high state in which they are. No. The state of Bhavamukha is one in which they are in both the states at the same time. This is described in this paper as a saddle point equilibrium. Those of you who understand some amount of physics, there's a stable equilibrium, unstable equilibrium, and neutral equilibrium. Apart from that, they say there's a saddle point equilibrium. In the saddle point equilibrium, you have a dynamic equilibrium, not static, in which intense activity is going on. At the same time, there is intense tranquility and calmness. This is not a contradiction. It is possible. This is called in physics and chemistry as a dynamic equilibrium. This is not a static equilibrium. The dynamicity coming from the Shakti of Brahman and the equilibrium coming from the aspect of Brahman which is completely transcendental. So the coexistence of Shakti and Brahman, not exactly coexistence, the same thing manifesting as Shakti on one side and Brahman as the other side. This is the allegorical meaning of the Ardhanarishvara. Ardhanarishvara has both Shiva and Shakti in the same body. They are trying to portray the Shiva Shakti Aikya through this extraordinary imagery of the Ardhanarishvara.
You can put them back in screen, right?
And this idea is there in our scriptures in so many ways. For example, the Panchamukhi Shiva. All of us know Shiva has 5 faces. The 4 faces facing the east, west, north, and south, and another face facing upward. What does it mean? The upward face is the transcendental aspect of Shiva, and Shiva, the transcendental in the Nitya, seeing up and immersed in that infinite eternal consciousness of the Absolute, and drawing, as it were, the consciousness of the Absolute and bringing it to the relative through the 4 faces is looking at the world. So yes, a sisraksha, a desire to create. How can the Supreme Being without desires have desire to create? These things have been discussed elaborately. Then final conclusion of the Mandukya Karika, it is just the nature of God to become many. It is not their desires. Devasesha swabhavoyam atma kamasya ka spruha. He has no spruha, he has no desire at all. So the Panchamukhi Shiva is a great example of the fifth Mukha, Panchama Mukha, the saddle point, which is a point of meeting between the absolute which sees up and the relative which sees the world. Isha Vasyamidam Sarvam. The transcendental Brahman is spoken of as Neti Neti in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and the imminent Brahman is spoken of as Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma Tajjalaniti Shanta Upasita in the Chandogya Upanishad. So the Brihadaranyaka on the one hand and the Chandogya on the other hand, they complement each other in talking about the transcendental and immanent, and the conflict between the superiority of one over the other has been put at rest by the idea of Bhavamukha, which is also the state of Vijnana. So Ramakrishna has the idea of Vijnana, which speaks of in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, and the Bhavamukha is taken up by Swami Sharadananda in the Lila Prasanga. When I wrote this paper, we had a big argument with the then editor of Prabuddha Bharata, who said the Vijnana and the Bhavamukha can't be equated. His argument is very funny. He said the word Bhavamukha does not occur in the Kathamrita, and the word Vijnana does not occur in Lila Prasanga, and therefore there can't be one. Very funny argument. Swami Tapasyananda clearly and unambiguously shows that the Bhavamukha and the Vijnana are the same. Sri Ramakrishna said that Jnanis which realize the transcendental state and then get lost. There are Ajnanis who don't reach the higher state at all, but there are Vijnanis who, having realized their transcendental absolute experience, live in the state of Bhavamukha, tasting the joy of God in the immanent aspect. They are special kind of Jnanis. Visishta Rupe Ishwar ke janache. Person who knows that there is milk is a Jnani. A person who has used the milk and drunk this milk and become strong, he is a Vijnani. He knows God in both the relative and the absolute, transcendental, the immanent, with form and without form, Saguna and Nirguna, and remains in Bhavamukha, happily moving between these two. This state has been described by Swami Vivekananda. Niranjana Nararupa Dhara Nirguna Gunama Bhaswara Bhavasagara Chiravunmada Prema Pathar Bhaktarjana Jugala Charana Tarana Bhavapar. The Aratrika hymn is a complete and total description of Sri Ramakrishna remaining in a Bhavamukha. Nirguna and Gunamaya, Bhaswara Bhava Sagara, luminous ocean of Bhava, Chira Unmada, always mad after God consciousness, Prema Pathar, great ocean of infinite Prema, a love of God. In that, suddenly the 2 feet are dangling. Bhaktarjana Jugala Charana. How come these 2 feet came with infinite ocean? That is Bhavamukha. You have the infinite ocean of consciousness, and also you have this form of God blessing you.
Maharaj, we have a question from Rita. Rita, you can ask your question. Unmute Rita.
Thank you. I'm from Athens, Georgia. In Thakur is the only unique avatar, I think, who has referred to himself as this place. So you speak about spatio-temporal metaphors. River is considered as time, but with respect to space, Thakur refers to himself as this place when he's saying, "Mother, please help Hazra He is disturbing the views of this place. But there's a third metaphor I've come across. I was in deep distress one day and I love making garlands for Thakur. So I opened the book and there he was. He had a garland and he had placed it on Mother. And when I saw that metaphor, I just felt a deep connection to Thakur because it seemed like he was present with me. He understood my distress because he loved making garlands. But then I'm reading the Thakur gospel, and at the very end, the very last sentence, he places the same garland on M, and I just can't wrap myself around this action. It seems so deeply moving that the last action that the avatar would do is to place a garland. Would you please explain this in terms of Bhavamukha?
It's your experience. You should explain.
Okay. Okay, Shaikat, I think, Shaikat, do you have a question?
You see, the idea is we derive from Sri Ramakrishna at any point of time, whether you're joyful, whether you're sorrowful, whether you're happy and unhappy, whether you're spiritually elevated or depressed, we receive from Sri Ramakrishna all kinds of help in all positions. That is Bhavamukha. He is called all things to all people at all times. It is just like in the olden days, we used to have different kinds of shops to purchase from. In Calcutta, for example, where we live, there is a Boipada in College Street. The entire street is full of bookshops. City is a bookshop, Boipada. Then you have a jewelry shops, the entire thing. Then came the idea of supermarket. You have a super mall, and anything can be obtained from there.
I have to be back on the screen. So
you can get anything from that supermarket anytime, from any floor. You are a bhakta and you want some garlands, you go to the third floor. Sir, I want to love God in the form of Sri Krishna. I go to the second floor. I want to see him in great bliss, Chaitanya. I go to Chaitanya's place, third, fourth floor. I want to realize him, the infinite in the absolute top floor. Shankara is sitting there. So everybody is accommodated there. And suppose you say, I want to see him at the infinite, then you jump up from the top floor. So he is a supermarket of all bhavas, the super mall of all bhavas, in which all bhavas exist, and ultimately it can be no bhava at all. Zero and infinity merge, saguna and nirguna merge. That is the supermarket of religions which Sri Ramakrishna has shown. Now we have one more, particularly in the days of Corona, COVID-19. You don't even have to go to the supermarket. Online, Amazon will give you whatever you need. So this is the mantra connection. So you're given a divine mantra. If you have faith in that mantra, you simply order through that mantra online to Sri Ramakrishna. I need this. Come on, serve online. So to be able to go online, you need a password. The password is the mantra which the Guru has given you. Use that password, connect to Sri Ramakrishna online, and everything will be served to you at that very moment. This is called prayer. If you need anything, straight connect to Sri Ramakrishna through that password called the mantra, order it online, and it is delivered to you instantly. That is the idea of Ramakrishna remaining in Bhavamukha, everything to everybody, at every place, at all times. And we can connect to him. Having him in your heart, you also remain, in a sense, in the psychological Bhavamukha. So that you don't get irritated about anything, you don't get distressed. Distress doesn't come to you because you are in the state of Bhavamukha all the time. You can move from one position to another. You don't get irritated when the telephone rings. You don't get irritated so there's a noise somewhere, a child cries somewhere, people are disturbed in meditation. The child crying, rejoice. God is speaking through that child. When there's a bad smell, people say, oh, the bad smell is also created by God as much as good smell. So the whole world is being converted into the divine, covered by the divine, enveloped by Isha Vasyamadam Sarvam.
Maharaj Shaikat has a question. Go ahead,
The
Shaikat.
Kundalini thing. I'm seeing it in the
Yeah,
chat
okay.
box.
You can answer.
I have a very funny answer to this. Whenever people used to worry
Yeah.
about Kundalini, somehow people are so fascinated by things which they are so peculiar. Ranganathanandaji used to be asked, particularly people in the West, Kundalini, Kundalini. Then Ranganathan used to funnily say, please allow the Kundalini to take rest. Don't disturb it. So the Kundalini thing is something which has become very fanciful in these days. There's a very interesting joke about a Westerner. He saw some peculiar sensation there at the back. Perhaps he was having some pain in one of the vertebrae. He came to the Swami. Perhaps Swami Swahananda was very funny person. He said, Swami, I have a peculiar sensation at my back. Is the Kundalini? Please, Shaikat, allow Kundalini to sleep. Don't dabble with Kundalinis. See, these are words you pick up. I warn you, because if you are a sadhaka, seriously bent on spiritual experience and spiritual elevation, don't throw phrases, don't dabble in words, don't go after cheap shibboleths and slogans. The greatest danger in spiritual life. We pick up bits and pieces of Kundalini, this chakra, this and that. Anyway, since you mentioned it, I will make some reference to it. See, awakening of the Kundalini is an essential prerequisite of any spiritual awakening. This is not my statement. This is the statement in Raja Yoga by Swami Vivekananda. And he also says, even to be able to dream, some part of the Kundalini power has entered into Sushumna. You know why? What happens when you dream? You become a creator. You create objects out of your own consciousness, which means consciousness which has the capacity to divide itself, as it were, into a subject and object, is endowing you with the power to be a creator. You are playing the creator God. That is the glory of human consciousness. Now, this is possible only when, Swami Vivekananda says in the Raja Yoga, some power of the Kundalini has escaped into the Sushumna unconsciously. But if you consciously open the Sushumna through absolute unbroken brahmacharya, this is a great necessity. Swami Vivekananda himself does not mince matters when he mentions it in the West. Unbroken continence is an essential prerequisite for the awakening of the Kundalini. And therefore, for most people, these techniques are not taught because they're esoteric, taught by the Guru in private to very competent disciples observing the strictest continence. So the Kundalini awakening is simply a state of awareness in which you enter into a mental state psychologically in which the truths of spiritual experience come to you to be real. I'll explain. If you go from the Panchakosha paradigm, the Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, when you reach the Vijnanamaya, spiritual experience first begins. Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, you are in the state of ignorance, you are in the state of jada, unawakened, inert state. Even the mind is only matter. That's why you can see great scholars talking through the mind, but they can't touch people's hearts. But a person in whom the Vijnanamaya is awakened, he sees, as Ramakrishna says, a divine light. See, Eki, Eki. He says, what is this? What is this? And that is accompanied by they hear listening to of a divine sound called the Anahata Dhvani. It was the Omkara. So these experiences come to you for the first time. You realize yourself as a spirit living in the body. Dehi, Shariri. Rather than identifying yourself completely with the Sharira, the body, Deha, the body, you know and realize yourself as a Shariri, living in the Sharira, Dehi, living in the Deha, apart from Deha, apart from the Sharira. In that state, the Kundalini has reached the Anahata. Go beyond that, Anahata, crossing the Vishuddha to Agya. That is the state of Bhavamukha. Agya Chakra is the state of Ishvara. The junction between the absolute and the infinite is the Sahasrara, and the relative from Kantha down to Muladhara. So the consciousness of a person in whom the Kundalini is awakened and reached the Anahata and beyond, he cannot come down to the state of Muladhara or even Manipura. Some people, divinely commanded, can speak through the mind, an illumined mind through Medha. It's called Medha. Many technical terms become necessary here. If you are a sadhaka, you will know the significance of all this. Even theoretically, if you want to understand, this is called a Medha. It's called a Dhi in the Gayatri Mantra, Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. It's called a Prajna in the Yoga Sutra, Prajna Loka, Ritambhara Prajna. Then from there you move up. And from the Agya, from the Anahata, you move over to the cosmic Anahata, the cosmic Vijnanamaya, and the cosmic Vijnanamaya, Samashti Buddhupahita Chaitanya, is called the Hiranyagarbha. It is also called Mahat in Sankhya. Mahata Param Avyaktam, Avyaktat Purusha Paraha, the Kathopanishad says, and the Shankara says in the Bhashya on this verse, Mahat Avyaktat Prathamam Jatam Hiranyagarbham Tattvam. This is the Tattva of Hiranyagarbha. The Hiranyagarbha is the cosmic mind or cosmic consciousness. And from there you move on to the higher through Anandamaya to beyond. And Sri Ramakrishna, some of our acharyas have told us, always remained stay put at the level of Anandamaya. Anandamaya is the link between the transcendental beyond, which is the Sahasrara and beyond in the language of Tantra, and in the language of Vedanta, Anandamaya, and below you have Anahata, etc. So he always remained in the state of Anandamaya, which is the consciousness of Ishvara. Therefore, he identified himself always with Ishvara. And then he used to say, there are two persons here. One is the Divine Mother, other is the devotee. It is the devotee who is suffering. Do you understand? That means he always had two entities, as it were. One who is always playing in Leela, the other who is always the transcendental state of consciousness. Ramakrishna's logic was very simple. If you say Kali is Saguna Brahman, why not say Brahman is Nirguna Kali? Just the reversal. And he said, don't worry about Nirguna at all for the moment, the transcendental. If you can reach the level of the Saguna and intuit God directly, see Him as endowed with form and name, as Kali, as Saguna Brahman, by the grace of Saguna Brahman, you can also attain to the infinite Nirguna. He says, Ma kintu kripa kore tar nirgun ruptao dekhi dite parin. Because mother is only Nirguna Kali, Nirguna Saguna Brahman, and therefore Brahman's aspect as Nirguna Kali can be seen by mother's grace. Only up to that a sadhaka can reach. When you talked about the Kundalini, I take it that you're a sadhaka, practicing seriously. So, with that understanding, I'm telling you this, you can reach only up to that. That is only up to the Agya. Beyond that, you have no power. It's God's power which has to pull you. You can immediately relate it to the experience Ramakrishna had. His Kundalini went on rising and rising, and he was stuck up with the Divine Mother. He told Totapuri, his Advaita Guru, I can't just go beyond. Impossible. He's seeing the palpable, divine, luminous, living form of the Mother Kali. And I can't go beyond this. I can't leave my mother. Totapuri became furious. Kyon nahi hoga? Then took a piece of glass and then pierced between the eyebrows. That is the Agnya Chakra. That means the Guru breaks that bandhana. Three kinds of granthis are spoken of: Vishnu Granthi, Brahma Granthi, and Rudra Granthi. This Granthi at the top, when it is broken, then immediately Ramakrishna says, I imagined knowledge to be a sword, Jnana Khadga, and cut the form of the mother into two pieces, and the mind immediately merged in the transcendental, the absolute. These are things on which you should meditate, think, relate to the various ideas of Vedanta and Tantra. Why did Tethapari do that? A guru, in the Ishvara in the form of a guru, he comes and releases you from this bondage. Most of us are stuck at the lowest Mooladhara, there's a Granthi. Then you come up, then you come to the Manipura and the Anahata, then you find another Granthi, then you go up, and the last Granthi is here. Let us not worry about that. We are most ordinary jivas. Theoretically, you may talk about all that. Let us not worry about the Rudra Granthi and going beyond. If we can raise our minds and the Kundalini from the Mooladhara and Swadhisthana, from Kamakanchana, from attachment to our sense pleasures, and rise to the Manomaya, at least the intellectual plane, and from there to raise the Kundalini to the Anahata is the most difficult. That requires a lot of practice and the power of brahmacharya and so on. Even that is possible. But beyond that is the cosmic realm for which you need the grace of God and the Guru.
Maharaj,
Thank you,
Maharaj, thank you so much, Maharaj. I think now we've done with the questions, Maharaj. I just like to conclude, Maharaj. What Maharaj said today, I advise everybody who's watching to rewatch again and again, because there's so many subtle details which he's mentioned that we have to go over it again and again. And secondly, I just like to remind everybody that Maharaj's 2 articles are available on the Prabuddha Bharata website. It's the January and February articles in 2011. If you have any difficulty, you can also send us an email, and we'll send you the copies as well. Or we may try to post on our home web page. So, Maharaj, I thank you so much, and I'm going to ask that you again come back in the future.
Yeah.
And Maharaj, would you like to give a closing prayer, Maharaj, and please bless us?
Yeah. So I have to come back again and again from the Nitya to the Leela. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. This prayer also can be seen through the lens of the Bhavamukha. So practice the sadhana of looking at the scriptures, of the spiritual teachings and the bhashyas and Ramakrishna's teachings through the lens of Bhavamukha and Vijnana. You will get tremendous insight. Purnam Madah Purnamidam. That transcendental is infinite. And this so-called relative is also infinite. And from the Nitya, which is the infinite, comes the Leela, which is also infinite. And when you move from the Nitya and the Leela, Nitya is not compromised, Leela is not also taken to be the final station. Purnasya Purnamadaya, what remains is a unique combination of the Nitya Leela, transcendental, immanent, infinite, finite, the absolute and the relative, in which you happily move around and swim in the ocean of the blissful consciousness of Bhavamukha of Sri Ramakrishna. Thank you so much.